What on earth has been going on with social media? Threads is a brand new app with 100 million users. Reddit's moderators have revolted and the site is still feeling the effects. And Twitter continues to set itself on fire regularly. Why is all this happening? Mike Masnick of Tech Dirt joins the show, and we discuss the most chaotic period of time for social media in years. We talk about what caused Twitter's outage and the site to just completely collapse, whether or not Twitter replacements like Threads can be successful, and how the different broadcast styles and economic models of social media influence the business and influence our posting. As always, if you enjoyed the podcast, please toss us a like, a subscribe, share it with one of your friends. If you really like the podcast and you want to support us, you can do that at patreon.com/Neoliberal Podcast. We really appreciate your support. You can also become a member of the Center for New Liberalism, who sponsors this podcast. You can do that at cnliberalism.org/become a member and get involved in the new liberal communities all around the country and the world. Thank you for listening and enjoy the episode. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Neoliberal Podcast, part of the Center for New Liberalism. I'm your host, Jeremiah Johnson, and joining me today is Mike Masnick. Mike, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, as we were chatting before the episode, I think the best way to phrase what's been happening with social media for the last 2 months is that it is the most significant 2 months that we've had in the social media business in years and years, maybe in the last decade. I don't know. They're just with Twitter catching on fire and Elon seemingly running into the ground and Threads launching and the entirely separate drama of Reddit and all of the controversy that's going on there. Can you remember a time that has had as much like significant social media action as the last 2 months?
No, I mean, it's crazy. I mean, I would say it's even crazier than that if you think about it, because like just not that long ago, the consensus viewpoint was that, the internet had stopped changing and that we had, 4 or 5 giant companies that ruled the internet. And that was the end of history. There was never going to be.
There was this long period of stability, right? Like,
yeah.
The last big thing I can think of was TikTok. The last big new entrant in the social media sphere was TikTok. But it's been a hot minute and nothing has changed.
Yeah, but even the entrance of TikTok was, people insisted that was impossible, that, that we needed, antitrust to take down Facebook because there was no possible way that it could ever be taken down otherwise. And, and Twitter was never considered one of the really big ones because it wasn't that big, but it had sort of, really locked in its position in terms of like that was where news happened, and there was talk of potentially other people would try stuff, but none of it ever went anywhere. And then just the whole world has become very, very different. And I think anything that people were predicting a year or two ago just is. It's a completely different world in terms of what is the social media landscape look like than it did back then.
So do we think this is a coincidence that all of this is happening at the same time? Because some of it is obviously linked, like Threads has launched because Twitter is weak, because they sense weakness from Twitter and they think they can take over part of that market. But in terms of like Reddit, for instance, catching on fire, I don't know what the link is between, like, this is the most controversy that's ever happened on Reddit, which is saying something. This is like the longest lasting episode they've ever had of their user base revolting. And it doesn't, at first glance, it doesn't seem linked to Twitter at all, because Twitter is also on fire. The only thing I can think of is that, we're in a rising interest rate environment for the first time in the tech industry's history, practically. and maybe just every company is panicking and doing dumb things. I mean, do you think there's any link, or do you think it's actually not just, it's weird that they both happened in the last month?
I mean, there are a couple of things. Some of this may be, sort of, I don't want to say conspiracy theory thinking, but like seeing connections where there aren't really connections. But if we had to determine possible connections, it could certainly be, the rising interest rate world changes a bunch of things. I mean, we had a long period of time where there was really easy money for large Silicon Valley companies if they wanted it. And now, the provenance of some of that money was potentially questionable. There was certainly an awful lot of foreign money that was going into Silicon Valley that was, basically, you could say people were trying to cleanse money from certain countries where it was more problematic, and so a lot of that money went into Silicon Valley, and that has become more difficult for a variety of reasons. One being rising interest rates and other issues, another being sanctions on Russia, perhaps, where there's a lot of Russian money that was going into Silicon Valley for a while. Maybe that's it. I think, more likely, though, is that in some sense, the, implosion that is Twitter almost acted as a kind of smokescreen for other companies to start experimenting with stuff and hoping to effectively hide behind it. It was commented on a little bit, but not entirely, and we could get into the specifics here where, like, Twitter's implementation of Twitter Blue, which Elon incorrectly refers to Twitter verification. This idea that you should pay for verification. Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook and Instagram implemented that, soon after Elon did. They implemented it in a slightly smarter way, but they sort of, copied that aspect of it. And with Reddit, Steve Huffman, the CEO and founder of Reddit, has said that he admires Elon Musk because he believes, which I think is a very distorted view of what's actually happening, but he believes that Musk is, taking a property that was having trouble monetizing and trying to whip it into shape. And so I think he sort of views his own moves at Reddit in a similar sort of fashion. Can
I just comment how insane that is, by the way, that one of my biggest theories about Reddit is that if they had done what they did, there's a whole story to tell about how they implemented the API change and everybody got mad at them. I think if they had just done it and then shut up and had no public statements, Steve Huffman does not do his publicity tour, there's no ask me anything, people would have been mad, there would have been some protesting, and then they would have moved on. But everything Huffman does, he opens his mouth and says, you want to talk about misreading the room, to give an interview where he compares, I think he compared the moderators to landed gentry.
Yes.
And then says, actually, I think I admire Elon Musk. I think he's doing a great job. Like, what an incredible misread of the room that just, it rather than die down, it made everything get 10 times worse. I don't know, but.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And he's done that multiple times. I mean, since the beginning of this, Huffman has repeatedly done things that just, make everybody even angrier at him.
The hardest thing to do in PR is to just shut up. It's the best move so often, but it's impossible. Like, everybody wants to be a poster. Even Elon Musk, he wants to post. He would rather post than have $44 billion. Yeah. And I know this because he set $44 billion on fire so he could post better. I mean,
yeah. I mean, I think that's absolutely true. And that, a lot of these guys, they've been convinced of the sort of great man theory of themselves, that they are the great men of history and that they have a better view on these things than everyone else. And they don't sort of recognize the fact that they're in something of a bubble, and their view of their own sites may be distorted and may not be the view of the majority of the users of those sites. And, I think both of them have made a pretty grand miscalculation. And it's, there is some element that's interesting to me, especially with both Twitter and Reddit, because, part of the appeal of both of those sites was this idea that, like, it was actually, in some sense, an unfiltered view of the world. And for a long time, I kind of expected, incorrectly, I think now in retrospect, that, one of the cool things about these kinds of internet properties was that it broke down, there are all these stories about, like, echo chambers and filter bubbles. And I think, and there's a bunch of evidence that suggests all of those are wrong. But, I really thought that Twitter and Reddit in particular were really good examples of the opposite of that in breaking that down. The fact that, any random person could communicate directly with, the super famous, wealthy, powerful experts on this subject or that subject. There are all sorts of clashes where, like, people think they know better than people who actually do. But there are lots of cases where it looked like the kind of thing that would pop bubbles. And
what's interesting is this does not happen on other social media sites. This is not a universal thing. Like on Instagram,
right.
There are no. I'm not going to say this is to a first degree true. It's not literally true,
sure,
but to a first approximation. But, like, there are no reply guys
right.
on Instagram. There are certain, like, Cristiano Ronaldo, famous soccer player, he posts on Instagram and gets a jillion replies.
Yeah.
But it's not a service that is built around the reply function in
right.
a way that, like, Twitter is built around replies and quote tweets and conversation.
Right.
Instagram is more a broadcast rather than a conversation.
Yes. And same with Reddit too. I mean, Reddit is very much conversation driven. And so, so it is kind of surprising to me, because you would think if there were any platforms where the owners of those platforms or the executives in charge of those platforms would have a better connection to the average user, those two seem like, pretty near the top of the list. And so there's this weird sort of surprising thing where, it does feel like, both of them, certainly have some level of reputation for sort of, living in sort of bubbleized thinking, surrounding themselves with people who keep telling them how right they are and how smart they are, which, to a certain degree is probably unhealthy for having a good sense of your own ability to read the room. And so, I think we're seeing some element of that where, these two people, even though they both run platforms that, allow lots of people to speak with lots of different perspectives, really sort of believe in their own vision of things to the point that they're missing the reality of what is happening on their own platforms. And therefore they're making decisions that they think are brilliant and the right way to go. And the users of those platforms, lots of them are basically saying, you're completely wrong, and this is driving me away.
I have one additional theory, and I actually just came up with this as we were speaking, so I have no idea if this is brilliant or maybe it's crap. But, in that difference between conversational social media and broadcast social media,
mm-hmm.
I think it's an important distinction because, like you said, Reddit it's a link aggregator, but it's built, the real community and the growth and the magic of Reddit comes from the comment sections and the communities that are built around different subreddits. So it's very conversation heavy. Twitter is obviously very conversation heavy. And other things like YouTube is not really a social network. It's a broadcast platform. You can follow people on YouTube and they can follow you back, but that's not how YouTube works. And TikTok is like that as well. You can follow people on TikTok, but it doesn't really matter that much. It's algorithmic. Right. And Instagram is much more broadcast than it is conversation. And it strikes me, I've just described 3 profitable social media companies because they are broadcast based, whereas conversation oriented, public conversation oriented places like Reddit and Twitter, the thing that they have in common is that they both have struggled mightily to ever turn a profit. And Twitter has like kind of once or twice barely turned a profit. But for most of its history, Twitter has just hilariously lost money. And Reddit has never made any money.
Yeah.
And like, I wonder if that's the other unifying factor why they're both on fire, is that they're both just struggling to make money in a way that TikTok does not struggle to make money, in a way that YouTube does not struggle to make money.
I think there is something to that. The one thing I will push back slightly is like Twitter was actually, it was not super profitable. But, I had looked and pre-Elon takeover, I forget the exact numbers, but I think it had been profitable in, I think it was like 16 of the last 20 quarters.
I think they started during the pandemic, but it was falling off again. That's my impression.
It was a little bit before that. They started being profitable, and it was always small profits. And there was a few big losses mixed in with that, though some of that was sort of paper losses. They sort of restated some things, but it was. You could argue that Twitter was at least break even and sort of trending in the right direction. And certainly over the last few years was not, like there are lots of companies that are just constantly losing money, and Twitter was not one of those. But they were certainly not like super profitable and just printing money. And obviously like Meta and TikTok and YouTube are the opposite of that. Like they are printing money just consistently. And I think you're exactly right that, they're all advertising model based, and, advertising, you can look back for the last century and realize that the broadcast model is perfect for advertising. And, those who have perfected the broadcast model have always been able to make a tremendous amount of money on advertising. Whereas the conversational model, and this was always sort of part of Twitter's problem, was, the advertising just doesn't feel as natural. Inserting it into a conversational model always felt awkward, a little spam-like, a little bit intrusive.
You could also say here text-based versus image and
Sure.
video-based, which is
Sure.
another way to kind of describe this distinction. And I almost want to say like the way that newspaper advertising has been decimated, in favor of like television and internet advertising. Like, it's tough out there to run ads in a text-based format.
Yeah, though it's interesting. I would want to think about that some more. I mean, I think, newspapers are like the sort of decline and fall of newspapers has been sort of an interesting area to watch. And, the newspapers are constantly blaming the internet for their losses. And to me, I think that the newspapers really completely lost their way and just didn't recognize what business they were in, which is that traditionally the reason that newspapers were so successful was they were the only place effectively that brought together a local community. And so if you wanted to reach that local community and you wanted to advertise to a local community, the newspapers were really your only option. So newspapers to me were always in the sort of community building business, though they didn't realize that. They always thought they were in the news business. And so as soon as the internet came along and communities could form around all sorts of things and not just your geographic location, the real value of newspapers kind of faded away. And the newspapers were so focused on the belief that they were in the news business and it was the news that was valuable rather than the community that they could bring together, that they just, all of the moves that they made kind of went against that. Setting up a paywall, for example, makes it harder to build a community, makes it harder to be like the one place for sort of, local folks to gather. And so, I don't know how much of that is because it's like text versus video versus just kind of like what business they were really in and sort of why advertisers were interested in working with them. But yeah, there's definitely interesting stuff to think about there.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, like I said, we're theorizing at this point,
Yes.
but let's get into specifics rather than theories, because the specifics are interesting as hell. So I think where we should start in terms of like things have just gone crazy with these sites is what happened with Twitter about a week ago. Or when this goes out, it'll probably be 2 weeks ago. But there was a weekend when Twitter just broke. And I want to say, I want to be very clear, because since Elon has taken over, the site's performance has suffered a little bit, but for the most part, Twitter has continued to run business as usual. And I've always thought that, like, as much as people are angry at Elon and a bunch of the cool kids went over to Blue Sky and Mastodon, like, as long as Twitter just remains a functional site,
sure,
it's going to survive. It's going to keep the vast majority of people because the network's already there. And so that's how I've thought about it. And so they've had little problems, but for the most part, the site has still been fine until last weekend. Can you recap for people who are not as terminally online as us, like what exactly happened?
I mean, there were a bunch of things that all sort of happened together, and it's not even clear how, what really happened.
Yeah, there's a couple of theories. We should go through the theories, but yeah.
Yeah, I think at some point in the future, we'll probably find out a little bit more about what really went down. The first thing that happened was that I think basically late on a Thursday, people started reporting that you could no longer see tweets if you were not logged in. And so, with Twitter, if you're logged in, obviously you can reply to people and you can follow people and do various things on the site, but you could always see public tweets. It's possible to set your account to private. My account is currently set to private. But public tweets you could see even if you weren't logged in. And suddenly that went away. And which created some difficulties. A lot of news stories have embedded tweets that were suddenly you couldn't see some of them. And there were other issues. If you linked to a tweet, people wouldn't be able to see it unless they had an account and were logged in. And so, it sort of broke some stuff that people had sort of traditionally relied on. And there was no, as is often the case with Elon's Twitter, there was no announcement. There was no explanation at the time. Eventually, he explained again, as he is often known to do. He replies to someone and explains the new policy, which, most people are never going to see. It wasn't even just like an out and out statement that more people would see, but rather a reply to someone saying that, that they were being, there was like massive data scraping or something along those lines. And so we had to close it off to protect the site. Which raises a whole bunch of questions.
I think we should be clear at the very beginning. At least to me, you can disagree. This is not a credible claim.
Right.
It is not a credible claim that Twitter is all of a sudden out of nowhere being like swarmed by so many bots that it's affecting the site. Like, data scraping exists, but it's been a constant for years. Like, this is something all sites deal with constantly. There's no reason that it would have gotten 100 times worse on a random Thursday for no reason.
Right. The one thing I will say is that there was probably an increase in scraping over the last few months, but that was due to Elon's own actions, which is the shutting down of the old API and putting ridiculously high fees on the API. And once you do that, the natural thing that some people who formerly relied on the API are going to do is that they're going to switch to scraping. So it wouldn't surprise me if there was an increase in scraping in general, but there's no way that it was, some sort of, like order of magnitude increase that would, crash the site and cause all sorts of problems. Though again, they have shut down one of their 3 data centers. So they already had sort of like trim the margin in terms of, what they could handle. And so, maybe there was something there, but there was nothing to indicate that, this would be such a problem or such a concern that they would have to make that move. But that was only the first move, right? Then like on Saturday morning, so like a day and a half after that first move, suddenly people started getting notifications saying like rate limit exceeded. Which is weird, right? Like you don't normally see that on any website, let alone a social media website, and especially a social media website with what's known as an infinite scroll. The idea being you can keep scrolling through Twitter and it never ends.
I just have to give a shout out, by the way. Everyone follow my new blog, which is infinitescroll.us. Thank you for that, Mike.
There we go. Excellent. Excellent. And so, a rate limit, you don't, there are like these sites all have rate limiting tools, but those are for situations where there is a scraper or a spider, as they're called, that have gone completely out of control. And so, every once in a while you see that and you sort of designate an IP address and you say rate limit this IP address to stop it from using up too many resources. But the idea that everybody was hitting these rate limits, and then again, eventually, Elon tweeted out this thing saying that because of like crazy data scraping, that there were limits. So what he refers to again is verified, but he really means people paying $8 a month for Twitter Blue or $1,000 a month for the like gold check mark. That they could view 6,000 tweets.
No, 600 for 6,000 for the paying people.
6,000 for the paying, 600 for registered users who weren't paying, and 300 for new accounts. Which the 300 and the 600, even arguably the 6,000 for like really online people, like you will burn through that really quickly. Now again, there are some questions about whether or not that was even actually accurate. There is a theory that many people have, and that might actually be true, that, basically their rate limiter just went nuts and they broke something internally. And then this was his sort of retconned excuse for that. And like later in the day, he said they bumped up the limits to 8,800 and 400. And then like an hour later, it became 10,000, 1,000 and 500. Mm-hmm. And as far as I know, they haven't said anything else since then. And in theory,
nobody's gotten the messages. Yeah, nobody's gotten the messages anymore. So
yeah, I haven't heard of anyone getting rate limited. I'm for my part, for what it's worth, like it actually made me just, I use Twitter much, much less. I mean, I was terminally on Twitter for many years. And I definitely have cut back a lot. But honestly, as soon as that happened, I really cut back even more because, I do still need to look at Twitter and use it occasionally for reporting and writing about stuff and seeing what people are tweeting. And I sort of realized, like, if I use up my allotment, if there is an allotment, and then I can't access the information that I need to access to write a story, that's a problem. So I'm now at the point where I am only logging into Twitter if I need to find something specific, and being like really careful about how much I'm looking at, just in case those limits are in place, which, is sort of, put a somewhat of a final nail in the coffin in terms of how much I actually use the site.
It's crazy because, like, I want to emphasize here that Twitter is an advertising-based business.
Yeah.
And the level of insanity to tell users on an advertising-based business, you can't use the site anymore. You've used it too much, and we want you to stop scrolling and stop viewing thing. It would be like if like NBC said, well, you've already watched 2 NBC shows today, so we're not going to let you watch a third. Like, this is the most insane business decision you can make. And so, yeah, like you said, a bunch of people have theories about what's happened here. And so we've kind of covered theory number 1, which is Elon's stated theory that bots are killing the site. This is something he says a lot, by the way, that bots are killing the site. I want to run by a couple other theories to you and see what you think of them. Some people noticed that this happened, and I think almost exactly, it is weird. It started happening in the morning of July 1st, sometime around 9 a.m., which is when apparently a contract with Google Cloud was set to expire. And there was a famous report that that Twitter is not paying Google Cloud,
Right.
and they're in a dispute with them. And so some people immediately jumped to Google turned off their servers, and now Twitter is dead, and that's what's happening.
Yeah, I don't think that one is true. I'm pretty sure that's not, because there was other reporting that said that Linda Yaccarino, who is the new CEO, perhaps CEO in name only, of Twitter, had worked out a deal with Google to start paying that contract, and she was trying to set up a larger overall agreement with Google in which they would advertise a lot more on the site and use some other services. And so my understanding was that the Google
she papered it over. She
papered it over.
Problem.
So the Google, now the other reason why it's almost certainly not the case that it was that they used Google Cloud, but that was more for internal stuff. They used it for analytics. They used it for some of their trust and safety tools. They used it for a bunch of internal tools. But Twitter itself, the tweets are not hosted on Google Cloud. So the Google Cloud relationship was more indirect than direct. And so that one seems really unlikely to me. It's possible.
The one thing I will say is that I think you're right, but I do believe also that Elon is trying to move things away from Google, and that in the process of making this switch, it's possible that some of those things were set to migrate over on July 1st, and they broke something during the migration.
It is entirely possible that there are some sort of interdependencies, and switching from this to that broke this or that, and this is how it all sort of played out. There was also, separate from the Google Cloud, there was some issues with whether or not Twitter was paying AWS, which is doing some larger hosting of parts of Twitter, which is, and even that is a relatively new relationship. Twitter didn't use AWS for cloud services until I think it was a year and a half ago. So really not even that long ago. And it's unclear if that bill got settled, but I know that there were complaints there. There were also issues with Oracle Cloud. So, Twitter sort of spread around some of its cloud service usage. And it is unclear which bills they were actually paying and which they weren't. So it's possible that there was something and someone turned off something or someone switched something and that resulted in problems. I think the Google Cloud example in particular doesn't appear to be accurate unless there's some sort of indirect path by which it happened.
I think I agree. I do think it's a very funny coincidence that it happened about 9 a.m. on July 1st. But I think I agree. And so I'll throw theory number 3 at you. If Elon's bots is number 1, Google Cloud is number 2. Theory number 3, and I think this was first discovered by a user on Blue Sky or Mastodon. I forget which one.
Yeah.
But somebody noticed that when you click on a tweet but you're not logged in, something weird was happening because you obviously couldn't see the tweet. They turned that off. And this is Thursday. They turn off the ability to see tweets when you're not logged in. But the Twitter website appeared to keep asking.
Yes.
It kept asking to see the tweet. And they pulled up, I'm not a coder. I don't know exactly what they did, but they pulled up some log that apparently shows 10 times a second or 100 times a second. Twitter was just continually asking. Twitter's website itself was saying, let me see the tweet. No. Let me see the tweet. No. Let me see the tweet. No. And that basically they were botting themselves in a sense.
Yeah. And that was definitely happening. So they were DDoSing themselves is generally the term where,
And so for people who don't know what DDoS is.
Yeah, it's basically when you send a whole bunch of bot traffic to a single website to take it down. It's basically flooding the website, through automated means with way more traffic than it is designed to handle, and it'll take down websites. And so, there was very strong evidence. It was reproduced by multiple people that this was happening, that Twitter had effectively DDoSed itself, sort of, sent an attack against itself. And that might have had that, could certainly hurt, could certainly take down a website and could be a problem. I talked to some security folks who looked at it and said, like, yeah, it's definitely happening, but they didn't think that it would actually take down the website, because they actually said that Twitter had set up some processes to effectively sort of, kill those requests and sort of, basically route all those requests to trash. It's not the exact thing that was happening, but sort of the effective equivalent of it, that the site was set up to sort of ignore those kinds of requests. So even though there were like tons of them coming in, it was able to, sort of, not be really negatively impacted by it. But there might be something in there, anytime you're doing something like that might, create a kick off a process that kicks off another process that may have resulted in some of the problems. So I wouldn't say that that's not the case, but it, there was the story that people just said, oh, they DDoS themselves and that's why the rate limits went up. It's not clear if that's exactly true either, even though, the factual claim that they sort of very stupidly set things up so that they were sending themselves a lot more requests than they should. That definitely did happen, but it looked like they were set up to not, get knocked over by their own stupidity there.
Interesting. It's a new wrinkle there with the what you heard from the security researchers. I did not know that yet. I knew most of the claims, but
yeah,
it does lead me interestingly into theory number 4. And I'm going to plug my blog one more time, by the way, which I can do because this is my podcast.
Yes.
I'm cribbing off a blog post I wrote. You guys should I'll check it out. I'll put it in the show notes. It's called 4 Theories of What the Hell Happened at Twitter. But theory number 4, I think, is something I would put in combination with theory number 3. It's not an either or kind of thing. Theory number 4 for me is just that Elon is John Hammond in Jurassic Park. If anybody likes Jurassic Park, if you've watched the movie, it is basically a tale of somebody, a billionaire with a lot of hubris, who wants to get into a line of business that he doesn't understand. What does that sound like? That sounds like Elon, but it's also the tale of the guy in Jurassic Park. And he pushes and he pushes and he demands to develop new things, and he doesn't really understand the risks. And one of the things, if you actually read the book of Jurassic Park, they talk a lot about chaos theory. This is why the Ian Malcolm character exists. He talks, chaos theory, you can never predict anything, blah, blah, blah. But the point, in kind of a generalized way, is that really complex systems are chaotic, and you can't predict exactly what's going to go wrong. You can't predict, exactly this specific failure will happen, and we have to guard against that. Rather, you kind of just need a general sense of like ability to respond to failure. You need a buffer zone, because things will fail in ways you don't expect. And in Jurassic Park, of course, famously, he cut costs, and he only has one IT guy. And so when the IT guy screws them over, they have no ability, and all the dinosaurs get out and eat people. And, where else have we seen a billionaire that takes over a business that they don't really understand, that fires a bunch of people and tries to run the whole business with like a skeleton crew of engineers, and then when something breaks, they have no ability to fix it, because all the people who would have known that are gone now. That's theory number 4, is just that this is a Jurassic Park situation, that something that should have been fixable isn't, because they fired all the people and they're changing too many things at once and they don't understand what they're doing. And so, of course, whether it was this or it was something else, something was going to catastrophically break at some point. It was inevitable. This is my personal theory, and I'm very proud of it. So I'm very curious what you think of it as a unbiased kind of observer.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely something to that. From early on, one of the things that people were pointing out is that like Twitter's a very, very complex site. I know, like, some people look at it and like, it can't be that complex. It's just a bunch of text, on a page, but it's an extremely complex system, because you got to figure out, who is subscribed to who, and which tweets to show them. And there's a lot of underlying technology there. And it's also built up a tremendous amount of technical debt over many, many years, and complicated systems to make this work. And, one of the things that people told me early on when Elon took over was that there really were a few people at Twitter that they referred to as load-bearing employees, that they really understood the systems. And there were lots of people who did not really understand how the different systems interacted with each other. And we've seen many examples of that in terms of like other things that have broken along the way where, they pull the plug on this, or they tinker with this algorithm or something, and something breaks because they don't understand how all of these things play together. And so I think there is some reality to that. I mean, I think when people talked about that early on, they assumed that the entire site was going to crash and die very quickly. But that never seemed to be all that realistic. And you had said earlier, you sort of figured, Twitter would just kind of, as long as they can keep the site up, it would continue to go. And Twitter spent a lot of time and brought in a ton of engineering knowledge over the years to make the site, sustainable in a way that it would be very difficult to take it down.
And they struggled with this, right? Like,
oh yeah,
there's a reason the fail whale is a funny term that everybody knows on Twitter, because it's the image that you saw when Twitter failed. And throughout the years, not in the last couple of years, but in early to mid Twitter, the fail whale showed up all the time.
Yeah. And then they really invested in resiliency, and they brought in some really, really top-notch engineers to construct a system that was very difficult to take down. And to some extent, we're seeing like that resiliency is part of what I think is holding up the site now. But the system itself is incredibly complex. And in some sense, it's like those engineers from 8 to 10 years ago, their work is in some ways maybe fighting against the work of the current engineers and keeping the site up, but they're occasionally bumping up against the edges and discovering problems that when they change this or change that. So I think that theory could very well be that,
there's just no margin for error anymore. Yeah. That whether it's staffing or whether it's the number of servers or whether it's, trying to do too many things at once, there's just no margin for error, and things can go wrong very, very quickly now.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case.
So that brings us to Threads, because I think there's been some reporting on this, but common sense tells us Threads has basically launched, and it's got more than 100 million people now. And from what I've read, Threads was not supposed to launch. It is not supposed to have launched yet, but Mark Zuckerberg himself literally just made the call that like Twitter is in such chaos, we need to move up the launch. Like we have to launch in a week. And about a week after the craziness at Twitter happened, or a few days, I don't know the exact timeline, but call it roughly a week, Instagram and Mark Zuckerberg and Meta launched a Twitter competitor. Do you know any further reporting on that in terms of like how exactly that happened, or like what's your impression of what the story is of why Threads is launching now? Is it just that simple?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, I think the planned launch was supposed to be the end of July, and they moved it up by a few weeks. Basically they had been testing it internally with a planned launch for end of July or beginning of August. And they just realized they saw the chaos. So, as we said, the chaos sort of started the Thursday before July 4th. And Threads launched on the following Thursday or late Wednesday, depending on how you look at it. And so it was basically a week after the chaos at Twitter started. So somewhere over that weekend, whether it was Mark or Adam Mosseri, who runs Instagram, sort of looked at everything that was going on and realized like, what we're testing internally, is a minimum viable product. It sort of works and we can roll it out. And they know, unlike most people in that situation, of any company out there, like they know how to build infrastructure that can withstand 100 million users flooding the site right away.
Can we stop for 1 second? And I know you're going to agree with me here, and just mention how insanely impressive it is that they have scaled up with basically almost no technical failure. And like it's a very simple site. It doesn't even have DMs yet.
Yeah.
But they have scaled to 100 million users in a week with basically no tech failures. Like Blue Sky still doesn't have 1/3 of a million, and they broke during when Twitter was going through the outage. Blue Sky also broke because so many people were trying to flood Blue Sky's website, and we're talking about like 3 orders of magnitude more than that. It's insane.
Yeah. No, I mean, scaling to 100 million people is actually an incredibly difficult and challenging problem. But like, again, Meta has the engineers who know how to do that. So they could easily be ready. I've actually seen a fair number of errors on it. I wouldn't say that it was a perfect rollout. I've I'm not even using it that much, but I've come across a bunch of times where it's like, we can't load threads right now. So it's not perfect, but yeah, it's definitely way better than almost anyone else. Lots of sites will fall over when you just get a few 100,000 users. So to be able to, scale to millions, within hours of it launching, it's a really impressive thing. But again, like the kind of thing that you would expect, Meta could do, and Meta was clearly prepared for that. And so I'm sure that went into the calculation of launching early was, we don't have all the features we want, and there's a couple things that'd be really nice to have, and we really should have at launch. But given the trade-offs, we know we can scale it. We know that it works as a basic, with basic functionality. So let's just get it out there. And my guess is that's basically the way it went.
I'm curious what your impression of Threads has been. And I guess I'll ask this in 2 ways. First, just in terms of content, because there's a lot of people posting on Threads. It's not 100 million people all posting at once, but there are legitimately millions of people, minimum, posting there. And probably tens of millions of people actively posting. And so in terms of content, I'm curious what your thoughts are there. And I'm also curious just in terms of the question about, is this going to be the thing that finally kills Twitter? Is this the Twitter replacement? Number one, does it even make sense to talk about what will replace Twitter? Is that the right question or the right way to phrase that? And number two, if that is the right question, or if there's something like that we should be asking, is it going to be obviously Threads, given how fast they've grown? Does it make sense that they are in prime position?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not necessarily one to predict the future, because
come on, that's what podcasts are meant for, man. Hot, and also this is like the 47th minute of a podcast. Only the hardcore people are still listening now, so you gotta reward them with some hot takes, man.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I think it's bad news for Twitter, mainly because the advertisers, right? I mean, there are all sorts of stories of like advertisers are just absolutely thrilled with Threads. And, a whole bunch of advertisers that had spent on Twitter and, even like advertisers had always complained that like the returns for advertising on Twitter weren't great, but often they felt they sort of needed to be there. So I think advertisers are just really excited about the idea of like, Threads being Twitter, but run by slightly more sane people, and where there's a lot less brand risk. The one thing that Elon did was really introduce tremendous brand risk for any advertiser on Twitter. And so, I think I think it's going to be really, really damaging for Twitter's ad business, which had already been really, really, hurt badly by everything that Elon has done. The reports that it was cut back somewhere between 40 and 60, possibly there were reports of 70% of advertising revenue disappearing from Twitter. And he brought on Linda Yaccarino to sort of, because she's an advertising exec, to bring back those advertisers. But if those advertisers are looking at, do we want to advertise on Twitter where there's a tremendous amount of brand risk, and Threads where, at least it seems like they're doing a better job, it becomes an easy call, and most of them already have strong relationships with Meta for both Instagram and Facebook. And so it just becomes an easy call. So on the advertising side, on the business side, I think it's really, really damaging for Twitter. On the user side, we'll have to see. It's funny because I hear such conflicting reports and just talking to people. And there are some people I know who love Threads. Like they're immediately like, Threads is it. Threads is exactly what I've been looking for. It is my Twitter replacement. The fact that it brought in all of these people already, that it had, a bunch of famous people at the beginning. I've heard from a few people, and I had this discussion with someone. There was a question of like, is it generational? I heard from millennials, for the most part, seem to really, really like Threads. I don't know what that says. I don't know if it's I don't have a larger survey of the generational interest in these platforms, but a very, very small sample size survey, millennials that I talk to seem to really, really like Threads. Other people were a lot more skeptical. I've seen a lot of people talking about how like Threads feels sort of like a plastic copy.
Threads is cringe, is what I've seen. It's cringe. It's lame. When people moved to Blue Sky, they talked about how there's like this insane, crazy level of posting on Blue Sky. All the posting, it's like weird Twitter migrated there. And whereas Threads is like, the theory I have here is that, number one, the algorithm is not up and running because you've only been on Threads for a few hours, right? Or a few days. And so the algorithm doesn't know what to show you. And so it's just showing you giant, big accounts that you don't care about. And that seems lame. And then also that all the people who are big accounts, who you're getting algorithmically so far, are Instagram big accounts.
Right.
And the way that you post on Instagram is like very, very different than Twitter. Like people will screenshot something from Threads that's like, how's the weather where you are? 1,000 replies. Or, like it's just very, like, it seems very cringe to compare like what an Instagram caption normally is to like what's witty on Twitter. I wonder if it's just like the difference between, like, what have I heard before that, I've heard something that like Twitter is where all the ugly but witty people go and Instagram is for beautiful idiots.
Right.
And like, I don't know if that's true, but I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, they're definitely very different platforms with very different styles, and so it was sort of interesting to see like the Instagram people, like try and move over and exist in that world. And so there's some weird awkwardness. There's a guy, Jason Gilbert, who wrote this very, very funny post on Substack. Where he, made all of these comparisons of like what Threads was like. And the best one was basically like when your favorite restaurant opens a version of it at the airport. It's like the airport version of your favorite restaurant. It's not really the same thing. It's, nominally the same thing. And it's got the same things on the menu, but it's not as many, and it's not quite the same, and it's more expensive, and it's not really as nice, and it doesn't have the atmosphere and all of that kind of, it's like, that kind of feels like Threads. And like, I don't know. I mean, again, like, I don't want to generalize from just like, just a few people's experience. Like my experience on Threads is like, there's a lot of people there. There's a weirdness to it, where like I found people, at least in my experience on Threads, like people are really aggressive in a very strange way. Like, I've posted some stuff on Threads and like, people are coming in hot. Like I can't quite describe it.
That's so interesting because I've had the exact opposite.
Okay.
And I don't know that one of us is right or wrong, but I've seen like everybody on Threads is all about like good vibes. We're at the new place, like yay, party, but like you're very like 40-year-old wine mom kind of party. Like it's all just like woo, kind of like. Well, and that's what I'm seeing, but I mean, I believe what you're saying too. I don't know how to reconcile that.
Yeah, I mean, that the sort of like new place party woo, like that shows up with every one of these. Like, when everybody went to Mastodon in November of last year, there was that vibe. When everybody was on Blue Sky in April, there was that vibe. That's just like new place, new vibes.
But like the Blue Sky style of posting, like I'm gonna let me reference something right here. Because I did this in one of my posts on the blog. Go check out Infinite Scroll. But when it was like, why is where is this? Why is Threads cringe? I had a post called "Why is Threads cringe?" And like I posted some stuff that was like taken down, like this was removed from Threads, And like some of the posts were like, the first person that posts the mozzarella stick meme on here, I'll fucking kill you. And they were like, we were removing you. That is not appropriate for Threads. And on like Blue Sky, that would have killed.
Right.
Or like there was another one where Arby's did a post on Threads, and one of the top replies was, I love doing hard drugs in the Arby's bathroom. And, Threads removed it. Whereas, if Arby's had tried to go to Blue Sky or Twitter and do that would have gone viral on Twitter, doing hard drugs in the Arby's bathroom. And like part of it is I can't get over like the difference of like the moderations, where Instagram has always been very heavily moderated. You can't there's no nudity on Instagram. It's like you said, it's very brand safe. And that's the feeling that I've got, is like a sanitized brand safe kind of place.
Yeah. I mean, they're definitely still working out the kinks on that. And like there have definitely been some challenges, and people have pointed out things on Threads, and like that they expected would be moderated, that there has been some things that people would categorize as hate speech and attacks that Threads refused to moderate. In some cases there were some where they did moderate it at first and then put it back up, and so I don't think that, like, I mean, again, like my whole thing is like moderating at scale is impossible to do well, so I'm not saying like they're doing it wrong, but I don't know how squeaky clean Threads will actually turn out to be.
Has Instagram managed to achieve some version of that? Because they're known for strict moderation. Like you can't show a nip on Instagram without the police coming down on you. But
Instagram has a slightly different challenge in that, right? So because there's very little, it's mostly images and much less text, and there are no links. And so like the Instagram moderation challenges are different. And so, computer vision AI stuff has gotten much, much better in the last few years. And so they make tremendous use of that. That applies a little bit differently to purely text-based conversations, where there's a lot more nuance in terms of what is hate speech, what is an attack, what is harassment. That is a different kind of question than what is a nipple, and so
what a philosophical question. What is a nipple?
Yes.
I mean, it's actually more philosophical than you give it credit for, because I remember some artist at some point like took a picture of a woman without her shirt on, and then digitally removed her nipple and put in a male nipple in its place, and was like, is this acceptable because men can be shirtless?
Yes.
And then Instagram was like, no, we're not playing your game. Like, this is still banned. Like, I don't care about your philosophical point, but like,
there are huge stories. There have been huge stories written. There have been podcasts entirely about like Facebook's ongoing battle about nipples, right? Like there's, you can go so deep in terms of like the different challenges, and every rule that Facebook would create, somebody would find the exception and sort of push the boundaries, and Facebook would have to determine like, well, how do we deal with that particular situation? And so,
what's funny? That brings me all the way back around to Reddit, where the Reddit moderators right now are engaged in what I call rules lawyering, trying to, like work within. But anyway, but yeah, no, your larger point about content moderation, it's extremely difficult at scale, nearing impossible, is definitely correct, I think.
Yeah. So I mean, it'll be interesting to see how Threads continues to evolve on that front. But again, like, I wrote something when Threads launched, and I mentioned like, Meta has the infrastructure to host, hundreds of millions of people without a problem, which nobody else or very few others would have. But they also have the largest trust and safety content moderation infrastructure out there. And people got mad at me because they point to all of the failings of Facebook and Instagram in some of their moderation stuff, and there are plenty of stories of failings. But like, I stand by that claim. Like, they have the biggest, and honestly the most competent trust and safety setup of anyone out there, just because they're so large and because they've invested so heavily in it. It doesn't mean that they're good at it, because it's, again, to me, it's impossible to be good at it. And there's lots of mistakes that they're going to make. And as they're figuring this out, and as they're figuring out what they actually want Threads to be, I'm not even sure that they know that yet. they're going to be stories of terrible decisions that they make, because that's just the nature of this. But again, they have the infrastructure. The biggest problem that most sites that like go viral have is that they don't have the infrastructure in place. This was the problem that Blue Sky had at obviously, orders of magnitude smaller scale, that they started running into content moderation problems early on, just because they didn't have the infrastructure in place. And it's difficult when you're focused on just like, we just need users, and we're still beta testing this, to then say we also need a full and complete trust and safety infrastructure in place. But again, Meta has that, and they know how to scale that.
One of the interesting things I think about when I think about, is Threads going to be the Twitter replacement? As much as that even makes sense to think about a single replacement, maybe it doesn't. But I think about the fact that, Meta has done this before. This is not their first rodeo taking on another social network. I think about like Snapchat becoming a big thing, and then Instagram releases stories that basically copies Snapchat stories. And it doesn't kill Snapchat, but it does kind of kill their growth. Like Snapchat basically, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I'm pretty sure they like leveled off as people like stopped having a reason. Like, I don't need to go there anymore. I can just do this on Instagram. And you could tell a similar story kind of about TikTok, that TikTok had explosive growth, and they were different because they were algorithmic. It wasn't about who you followed. It was just the algorithm. And it took them a while to get around to this. But, Instagram introduced their version of this, and Facebook has done something similar. And, you could even throw YouTube in there. But like TikTok's growth has leveled off. And, Facebook is honestly very good at this. Like, we're going to copy some of your features and release our version of this. And maybe it doesn't kill you, but it definitely hurts you. And, in Elon's case, he might not need someone else to kill the site. He might be able to do it himself. But Meta, if it was any other company, I don't know. But like Meta and Facebook and Instagram, they know the playbook of how to successfully copy a product.
Yeah. And that's definitely a really interesting thing, though it is notable that while Threads is using the Instagram user ID setup and social graph, they did launch it as a separate product. And the other examples you gave were all launched within, Reels and Stories were launched within Instagram. And definitely did sort of copy the features and sort of try and say, like, if you like these things, you could just get the same feelings within Instagram. Whereas Threads is a separate app. And it'll be interesting to see if that works. It also, of course,
it's interesting how they've done that, because you're right, it's separate, but it's very like, it feels like it's a co-Instagram. Like they're branding it a little bit like Instagram. And I think it's a smart decision, because Facebook has a terrible reputation, but Instagram among the Zoomers and the millennials still has mostly pretty positive.
Yeah, I think that's true, and it's using the same colors as Instagram, so there's definitely a connection there. And even like the app, when the day that they launched, and I was looking for it, I looked, I was just following like Meta, all of Meta's apps to see when I could see Threads, and they didn't put it up under Meta; they put it up under Instagram. Even though like Instagram itself shows up as a Meta product, but the company name on it was Instagram rather than Meta. I was like, what is going on here? But it's interesting, but it has also I've seen a lot of people raise the question of like whether or not there's going to be an antitrust issue here. If we're going into like the policy side of things, but like, because they're leveraging their massive 2 billion, users on Instagram to effectively create this thing that, is designed to copy and effectively kill Twitter. Now, again, like I think Twitter is in self-destruct mode, but there is a question of whether or not this might be seen as violating antitrust law as well, sort of leveraging their dominance in one position to take on another company.
So I have two theories here, and I'd love to hear you respond to them. The first is that that's not going to happen for red tribe, blue tribe reasons, because the people in the blue tribe who are typically very antitrust happy are going to be happy to see Elon fail and someone else take his. But even though they don't love Mark Zuckerberg, At this point, watching Elon fail is like the team sport for Tribe Blue. So that's theory number one. Theory number two is that I wonder if how they're planning to implement the Fediverse, which is a terrible word, but the federated universe of interoperable social networks that you can plug into each other. I wonder if that protects them from antitrust claims in some sense, if they can just say, they work this out over the next year and they become part of the Fediverse. Well, you can just export your followers to wherever, you can leave whenever you want. I wonder if that is a shield.
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, it should be. There is a question of whether or not they will really implement the Fediverse side of it. I was kind of excited about that. I know like people have very, very strong opinions in all different directions on it. I thought it was good that they're, the plan is, they said, to interoperate with ActivityPub so that you can, view threads or talk to people on threads without being on threads, without giving Meta any information about yourself, because in theory you could be using a Mastodon instance or another compatible server and communicate that way. If they implement that, I think that would be a good argument. I think they also have the argument of, look, Twitter was self-destructing. There have been a bunch of attempts to build replacements and none of them succeeded. And we just built a better product that people really want. And, it's not that we're abusing our position. We're just providing the people what they want. And so that might work. We'll have to see. I've been hearing more and more people insist that they don't think that Meta is actually ever going to join the Fediverse with threads. They claim they were, they've said it's important to them. We'll watch and see what actually happens there. And then, what does that mean on the policy side of things will be really interesting to see as well.
Yeah. And to be fair, I think it is likely that somebody could try something because just cynically, the new revived antitrust movement is basically, to my eyes, is not any more sophisticated than just big is bad.
Yeah.
So sometimes that accidentally lands them in the right position, but sometimes they just say big is bad for no reason other than big.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that has been a big problem of the modern antitrust movement. The however you want
that
to
and the
look
focus on tech, because there are so many industries. This is the thing that drives me crazy: is that like go break up the hospital chains that dominate everything. Break up the telecoms if you want to focus on, but like big social media companies and like Google, like the proposals to break up Google into a bunch of companies are just very unserious when dealing with reality.
I completely agree. I mean, I think that there are so many other huge obvious targets for, if you want to do like real antitrust, you can find like huge problematic situations. Whereas, the social media market, as we've seen, is like a lot more dynamic than people expected, and a lot will change over time. And I'm not sure that we need an antitrust movement to do that. And I think they're if you're concerned about the size and the power of a Meta, there are other tools in the toolbox that would make a lot more sense than going into trust. But that doesn't mean that someone won't bring it. I feel like it's probably going to happen. But we'll see how effective it is. This particular FTC now has a track record of losing a bunch of their antitrust cases. So we'll see how it goes.
All right, so we've gone a little bit over time, but, just bonus listening for anybody who's here. I'm going to close with our traditional final question, which is, where can people go to learn more if they're interested in what we've been talking about? I will start by recommending Tech Dirt. Obviously, you should go to Tech Dirt. You should read everything Mike Masnick has to say on these subjects. It will make you smarter. You will be more informed. You should also subscribe to Infinite Scroll. You can do that at infinitescroll.us. But other than our two websites, Mike, what would you recommend in terms of, are there particular things that you think are just really insightful when talking about all the things we've been talking about today?
I mean, there are a bunch of other places that I think are really good. There are, some reporters who are excellent. I think in terms of reporters who have done really good coverage on all of this, The Verge has really good excellent reporting. I think there's a site called Platformer News, which is just two reporters who are fantastic and sort of deeply connected on this. And, so if you want to follow sort of like the news angles of what's going on, I think those two sources are, really thorough. And I learn a lot from both of those. And then, just paying attention on social media. I don't know where though, because we're still figuring out where all this is gonna fall. And I'm playing around.
Where can people follow you on the news sites? Because your Twitter is just Masnick or something like that. But is it the same handle on Threads and Blue Sky and Mastodon and everywhere else?
Yeah, I use Masnick pretty much everywhere on social media. I don't use Twitter very much at all anymore, and my account is protected. So there's generally and the interface, if you're protected and people want to follow you, is ridiculous, and it's almost impossible for me to figure out how to let people follow me. So don't try and follow me on Twitter right now. If you're on Blue Sky, I am probably using that the most. That's the one that I feel the most comfortable using currently. But I am still using Mastodon. I'm experimenting with Threads. I'm playing around with all of these things. We didn't even mention it, but I've been playing around with Nostr as well. I'm not even going to get into what that is.
I've been posting on Roblox. That's where I am.
Excellent. So, right now we're in this sort of upheaval. So, keep paying attention and searching around. Like you don't have to commit to anything right now. Once things settle down, I think people will figure out where they want to be.
Well, it'll be really interesting to see. I think in a month's time, the picture will look even more different than it does right now.
Yeah.
Mike Masnick, thank you so much for coming on the show, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always fun to talk about this stuff.